This is my update for Russian military operations in Ukraine for September 21st, 2022. I am in Bangkok, +7 GMT, in case you're seeing this and it's not quite yet the 21st where you are. And as I like to do, let's take a look at the map. So this is liveuamap.com, very pro-Ukrainian, pro-NATO. A lot of this information comes from the Ukrainian General Staff or the Ukrainian government and other sources across the West. We look around Cherson. Again, this was where the first and largest offensive took place, and it has made no progress. They continue sending smaller and smaller units into Russian defenses. Russia continues to defeat them. Now, here's the thing. Just because Ukraine is sending forces into Russian defenses does not mean that that is an offensive. This could be reconnaissance in force, where they are attacking Russian defensive positions to obtain information about their disposition, their strengths, and their weaknesses. And as a matter of fact, looking back at the map, we can see something very similar taking place from around Zaporozhye all the way over to Vuhledar, just north of Mariupol. We've seen these attacks over and over again over the last week or two now. And I think if there is another offensive launched, we will know about it. A significant amount of troops will be involved. These are much smaller actions. Some people may refer to them as probing Russian defenses. This is reconnaissance in force. That's what it looks like to me. Now, if we go to Donetsk city, right now on liveuamap.com, you will see, a fire is noted on the map. And at other times, they will even note that there are civilians being killed in Donetsk city. Who is killing these civilians? Ukrainian artillery is killing these civilians. Artillery, rockets, they are shelling downtown Donetsk city. There are no military targets in downtown Donetsk. It is purely a civilian area, and Ukraine is deliberately shelling it. So also on this map, you're going to see noted Russian attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, power plants, hydroelectric infrastructure. Russia is attacking this, and we see the West condemning this. But is the West also condemning Ukrainian attacks on infrastructure in Russian-held territory and on civilian populations? And the answer is no. North of Donetsk, the Russian offensive continues, especially around Bakhmut. If you look at Bakhmut, you're going to notice that Russian forces are moving along the flanks. They're trying to cut it off from these main transportation roads and rail. They're trying to encircle Bakhmut. That continues, even according to this map. And if we go north still, we see Ukrainian forces claiming they're making progress toward Lysychansk, but this is very slow going. Likewise toward Liman, this is very slow going, and it's not guaranteed that they're going to continue doing this. This is the remnants of this Charkiv offensive. What is left, they continue trying to push into these areas. Another place to watch is Kupiansk on the Oskol River. This is in eastern Charkiv Oblast. The Oskol River flows. It kind of leaves a little slither of Charkiv Oblast still in Russian hands. The Oskol River serves as a natural defense line that Russia is maintaining. So we need to keep an eye on these areas. Ukraine's ability to cross the Oskol River into eastern Kupiansk or elsewhere along the Oskol River, Ukraine's ability to continue pushing into places like Liman or Lysychansk. And if they're unable to do this, this is because they've reached the limit of what they can achieve with this offensive reserve that they put together and that they've now used. Now, another thing, while we're still talking about this map, it has noted, and Russian sources have noted, that Cherson, Donetsk, Lugansk, they're all talking about holding immediate referendums and joining the Russian Federation. We have been talking about Russia possibly upgrading from a special military operation to something like an anti-terror organization. But if all of these regions hold referendums and decide to join the Russian Federation, that is going to significantly change the architecture of this military operation. This is another potential way Russia can escalate. We already see them hitting civilian infrastructure like power and water. And of course, it's not just civilian infrastructure. It is also used to enable Ukraine's combat abilities. But if these regions are officially part of the Russian Federation, then it's no longer a special military operation. It is Russia defending its territory that it claims as its own territory. That means all of the limitations imposed on the special military operation right now are gone. You could have conscripts move into these areas that they aren't allowed to right now under Russian law. Not saying that they would do that, but I'm saying they could do that. And even if they were to do that, they would remain in the rear, and troops that are more suitable for frontline operations, that they would be freed up and they would be able to concentrate on the front lines. So this is something that we have to keep an eye on. How soon will these referendums be held? I don't know. There's different dates being floated, and what the implications of this, again, remains to be seen, but I'm just giving you one possible outcome that this could all lead to. This could be the way Russia is able to escalate away from special military operation towards something more intense. Now let's move on to the Pentagon. I haven't done one of these in a while. This is a Pentagon briefing. Senior defense official and senior military official hold a background briefing. So there's two representatives, a senior defense official and a senior military official. I don't know what the difference is. And this was held on September 19th, 2022. So it's relatively recent. They're in the afterglow of this Charkiv offensive. It's being billed as a turning point in the conflict. So you would expect the Pentagon to pick up on that and explain it to the media. What does the Pentagon do instead? This is how they start the briefing out. They say, the bottom line is, as we look at the battlefield, Russia is failing in its strategic objective. On September 1st, you might recall, President Putin called for the entirety of Donetsk province to be under Russian control by September 15th by Putin's forces. That has clearly failed. When did Russian President Vladimir Putin ever give this order? I missed this. I did not see this. And I looked it up because I really wanted to know if this was actually something. I'm almost certain that if this was actually something President Putin said, I think I would have heard about it. Instead, what I found was this Newsweek article. Putin gives army September deadline to take more Ukraine land. Official. Who's official? A Russian official? No, it's not a Russian official. It is a Ukrainian official. It says Russian President Vladimir Putin has reportedly given his troops a September 15th deadline to push to the administrative borders of the eastern Donetsk region in the ongoing war, according to a Ukrainian military official. And then elsewhere in this article, they're citing the Ukrainian General Staff. This is the same Ukrainian General Staff that uses lowercase r's every time they write the words Russia or Russian in their briefings, their daily briefings on their Facebook page. So this is just some rumor spread by Ukrainian sources. It has no basis in reality. No one in Russia on September 1st would have thought that it was even remotely possible to take Bakhmut, Seversk, Soledar, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. These are all of the cities that Russia still needs to take in order to have all of Donetsk under control. This would take months to do. Nobody in the Kremlin thought this was possible to do in 15 days. Guaranteed, no one thought that. And this is how the Pentagon chose to open their briefing in the aftermath of the Kharkov offensive, where we're told this is a turning point, everything is going Ukraine's way. And the way they're going to try to prove that is by citing a made-up objective Russia never had and claiming that Russia is failing because they couldn't achieve this made-up objective they never had. That doesn't bode well for Ukraine. And as you're going to see as I go through this briefing, they're not very bullish on Ukraine's future prospects, and the type of support that they're able to continue lending Ukraine is not significant. There is no follow-on to what just happened in Kharkov. They don't have a new tranche of equipment or money or anything to give Ukraine to follow on with this supposed success. So there's that. The senior defense official goes on and says, we're seeing the Kremlin increasingly straining to find new recruits to fill out their thin ranks. And the Russians are performing so poorly that news from Charkiv province has inspired many Russian volunteers to refuse combat. Now, I heard that. And again, that was from Ukrainian sources. There was no evidence of that anywhere in actual Russia. This was something out of Ukraine. This is something Ukraine says. Ukraine has been making up stories like this since day one. This is part of their propaganda war. This is war propaganda. And war propaganda certainly has its place amid warfare, but it is not something that the Pentagon should be repeating, unless, of course, they have no reservations about their credibility. Apparently, they don't. They talk about Russia trying to recruit prisoners and even prisoners refusing to fight. Again, no evidence, no specifics, nothing at all given to substantiate any of these claims. And again, they had the opportunity to open the briefing by giving a list of things that were going well for Ukraine. There are no things going well for Ukraine. This is why they had to make a list of things that are entirely fictitious. Now, the senior military official present gave this rundown on what's going on the battlefield. So they say, in the vicinity of Charkiv, we assess that the Ukrainians continue to make efforts to consolidate their gains and are holding the border to the southeast. We've observed fighting in the vicinity of the east of Kupiansk. I talked about that. In the meantime, the Russians continue to attempt to shore up their defensive lines and solidify their position. What does that mean? That means the offensive is over. It's over. It's not going to go any further. They are now both sides are trying to stabilize the front line, get into positions that they will be able to hold. For Ukraine, to ensure Russia cannot launch a quick counteroffensive and retake territory, and for Russia to make sure that Ukraine doesn't get another town or two at the very end of this offensive. The briefing actually admits that Russia is making progress around Bakhmut, which I just talked about as well. And they kind of dismiss the significance of this. And I've seen the Western media doing this very frequently since this Kharkov offensive business unfolded. They've referred to it as a waste of time, senseless, robotic. I've seen all of these terms used across the Western media. And the reality is that Bakhmut is a key junction in this defense line that Ukraine has created over the last 7 to 8 years. And if it is breached, that will be a huge hole in Ukraine's massive defense line that has been holding up the Russian military for months now. If Bakhmut falls to Russian forces, Russian-backed forces, that will be a huge hole. They will be able to work with that to roll up what's left of the defense line and to finish taking the Donetsk Oblast or the Donetsk People's Republic. So they really should not be downplaying it, but of course the reason they're downplaying it is because it is so significant. After these initial comments by the Pentagon representatives, then the Western media starts asking questions. So here's one question. I'm just curious, is there a danger of the Ukrainians outrunning their supply lines in the offensive? And what is the significance? There are news reports, and I guess the Ukrainians have said that they've crossed the Oskol River. What's the significance of this? So this is a Western journalist who didn't even listen to the opening statement made by these Pentagon representatives that the offensive is essentially over and they're trying to stabilize their lines. This business at Kupiansk is not the Ukrainian offensive continuing to go. It is this like last bit of unfinished business that they're trying to tie up and that the Russians are trying to prevent the Ukrainians from tying up. Now, another question was about the mid and long-term needs of the Ukrainian military. So this is what the senior defense official says. We certainly recognize that we are providing Ukraine with capabilities that they're using in the fight today. Some of these capabilities will be depleted by the current fight, and they'll need to be replaced. And I've been talking about this for months now, how what Ukraine started this conflict out with, they had an air force, they had large numbers of tanks, armored vehicles, they had multiple launch rocket systems, they had all of this, air defense systems, everything. And Russia has been systematically destroying it, removing it from the battlefield. Ukraine has turned to the West to replace all of this lost equipment. And as it comes in, Russia is destroying that as well. This offensive was fought with a large percentage of Western provided equipment. I'm going to get into that more later on in just a moment. But that's what the Pentagon is admitting, that they lost a lot of equipment and it's going to need to be replaced. Replaced with what? What does the West still have in abundance that they can use to replace an army that just got wiped off the battlefield around Cherson and Charkiv? No real answer given. Then there was a question about giving Ukraine more tanks. Again, Ukraine had hundreds of tanks. They were destroyed. They got hundreds more from, say, Poland and other Eastern European countries, supplying Ukraine with tanks. They would be able to operate Soviet-era tanks. And now those are being destroyed, especially during this offensive around Cherson and Charkiv. A lot of those tanks have been destroyed. So now they need more tanks. Where are they going to come from? And the answer that people are arriving at are, well, we'll send Western tanks. We'll send German Leopard 2s. We'll send American M1 Abrams. But this is what the senior defense official says. And see if you can pick up on where they're going. We agreed that armor is a really important capability area for the Ukrainians. Now, they've largely been relying on Soviet-type tanks, and we've spent a good deal of effort in encouraging countries, largely in Europe, who have some of these, formerly Russian-made tanks, to provide them to Ukraine to supplement Ukraine's existing tank inventory. But as I said before, when we look at Ukraine's longer-term needs, we recognize that there will be a day when they may want to transition and may need to transition because all of their Soviet-era tanks will be destroyed, NATO-compatible models. We're always very cognizant, though, with any new equipment that we provide to Ukraine or that our allies, our partners provide, that there is substantial training, maintenance, and sustainment considerations. So we want to make sure that when we provide capabilities that all of these are taken into account. And what they're saying, what they're admitting, is that it is completely impractical to send Western main battle tanks to Ukraine. It will take months, if not years, to integrate large numbers of Western main battle tanks into Ukraine's military effort. And for people who continuously say, and this is a good point to make, well, they'll send these Western tanks and they'll be operated by Western tankers. They won't be operated by Ukrainians. The problem still remains that you have a tank on the battlefield that was designed to operate in a combined arms environment, and instead it is out there by itself, vulnerable to Russia's military capabilities. This is why Ukraine has lost so many tanks and why they are begging the West for more, because they're putting them out on the battlefield in an environment where they will be quickly destroyed. And the same thing will happen whether it's a German Leopard 2 or an American M1 Abrams, they will be destroyed because they're going out there on the battlefield in an environment they were not designed to be in. And so one of these journalists, they ask a follow-up question because I guess they were picking up on the fact that this Pentagon official was more or less saying, well, we're not going to be sending them tanks anytime soon. So that they're asking, so are tanks on the table or not? And this is what the senior defense official says in response. Tanks are absolutely on the table, along with other areas. We're looking at the entirety of the Ukrainian armed forces and considering for the future what capabilities they will need and how the US and our allies will be able to support Ukraine in building out those capabilities. In terms of the immediate fight, the tanks that are available that could be provided very quickly with little to no training are Soviet-type tanks, but we're certainly open to other options provided that the training, maintenance, and sustainment can be taken care of. Which it can't be. It cannot be. It can't even be taken care of for their Soviet-era tanks. Fuel, spare parts, places to repair them. These are all problems that Ukraine has right now, even with their Soviet-era tanks that they're very familiar with, that they've been using for years and forever, really. And now we're talking about sending Western main battle tanks to Ukraine. It is so impractical. But again, these journalists showing up at these briefings, even though they've been covering this conflict for months and other conflicts in the past, they know nothing about how any of this works. They are not experts in the field, and they're not able to understand what's going on themselves, let alone relay this reality to the public who depends on them to be informed. And then so the media starts to ask about longer range missiles, and more specifically, they're talking about these ATACMS Army Tactical Missile System, missiles that will work with the HIMARS system. And they've got a range of up to 300 kilometers. And the Pentagon representative basically says, no, not at this time and not anytime soon. They're not thinking about transferring these to Ukraine now. You can believe that or not believe that, because other weapon systems that it didn't really look like they were interested in sending to Ukraine because of the futility of doing so. They ended up sending them anyway. So ATACMS missiles could end up in Ukraine. It's just one of those things you got to wait and see. Now, people who are asking about this are asking because they think it's a game changer, another wonder weapon game changer that is going to turn the tide in this conflict. And it is not going to, because the US will never be able to supply enough of them to make any sort of real difference on the battlefield. And however many they're able to supply Ukraine, you have to remember that Russia has an equivalent to this. It's called the Iskander missile system. They have these trucks with Iskander missiles. They can launch these missiles. They're just as accurate as ATACMS. And they actually have a longer range. So ATACMS is 300 kilometers. Iskander is 400 to 500 kilometers. And Russia has many more of these and many more troops who are trained to operate these systems. So the advantage is still going to be for Russia. Certainly, it will be a capability that Ukraine didn't really have before, but it's not going to be a capability Russia doesn't already have and doesn't already have an advantage in regards to. And that's about it for the Pentagon briefing. And what does that tell you? That you just saw this supposed breakthrough, this huge turning point in the conflict, and the Pentagon really doesn't have anything new to say. If you've been following my updates and my coverage of these briefings, you will recognize all of these themes very easily. It is just the same story over and over again. It does not bode well for Ukraine. Now, the Pentagon mentioned the Charkiv offensive. They didn't mention the Cherson offensive so much because it was a failure. And it is something that even the Western media, and I've said this many times before, even the Western media admits that that was a failure and Ukraine suffered huge losses. It was not a feint. It is not a slow grind. It was meant to be a hard push onto Russian positions, overwhelm them, and a breakthrough, just like they did at Charkiv. And it didn't work. Got stopped, and they suffered huge losses. Now, every military plan has a contingency built in. It should, if it's a good plan. And Ukraine's probably thinking, well, we're not going to break through like that. Let's just try to continue putting pressure on Russia as much as possible. And that is what they're doing right now. And that's up to the Russian military to hold their lines, to maintain their supply lines in the rear. Ukraine had been attacking the bridges, trying to complicate that for Russia. So it really is a matter of Russia maintaining its supply lines and holding its defensive lines. And it's a matter of Ukraine keeping pressure on Russian forces. And then, again, it's just time. It'll take time to tell where this all goes. And it might seem like I'm covering the Charkiv and the Cherson offensive too much. I've talked a lot about it. I've dedicated several videos to it. But the more we understand about what just happened, the better we'll be able to understand what is going to happen next. So a Patreon supporter of mine pointed this video out to me by the Austrian army, their YouTube channel. It's a presentation by Colonel Marcus Reisner, and it's titled, "All In, the Ukrainian Offensives in Cherson and Charkiv." And I've watched some of Colonel Reisner's other presentations, and he's a colonel, so he has insight into military matters, and so his analysis is worth listening to, even if you don't entirely agree with it. And the reason this Patreon supporter of mine pointed this out, and then I saw Alexander Bekuris of the Duran also mentioned this particular presentation. The reason it was pointed out to me was because one of the first things Colonel Reisner points out is that Ukraine used a huge amount of Western equipment in these offensives. Around Cherson and in Charkiv, it was mostly equipment the West sent to Ukraine, and they built up this huge reserve and they used it on these two offensives. And my Patreon supporter pointed this out because they have noticed me pointing out for months now that Ukraine is out of their own equipment. They depend heavily on Western equipment. They had this huge amount of Western equipment. What did they do with it? Did they use it to hold their defensive lines across the line of contact, or did they just gamble all of it on these two offensives? And that's really what it looks like just happened. Now, what does Colonel Reisner point out in his presentation? He points out that, they used mostly Western equipment, huge amounts of Western equipment for both offensives. The Cherson offensive, he admits it was a failure. There were two, what he calls fixing operations to the north and to the south, and then in the middle, he claims that was where Ukraine wanted to break through toward Cherson city, and Russia stopped Ukrainian forces in all three areas. And ever since then, Ukraine has been trying to continue pushing in these areas, and Russia has continued stopping them. And even Colonel Reisner, an Austrian army officer, is admitting that Ukraine suffered heavy losses. He described the terrain. It's wide open terrain. Ukrainian forces were, he didn't put it this way, but what he was basically saying was they're moving across wide open territory and Russia just blew them to bits with their artillery. I mean, that is what basically happened. And he even shows footage of this. One of the river crossings across the Ingulitz River, he shows Russian artillery smashing it, essentially. And for people who are skeptical about this, I pointed out many times that even the Western media, the Washington Post, for example, this article right here, which I included in the video description below, "Wounded Ukrainian Soldiers Reveal Steep Toll of Cherson Offensive," they talk about how lopsided the fighting was in Russia's favor, just on every level, in terms of numbers, the numbers of guns and tanks and other equipment, artillery shells, the amount of ammunition Russia had available versus Ukraine, and the quality of the fighting. Also, Russia just fought better, outfought Ukraine. Now, the Charkiv offensive, Colonel Reisner points out that, again, a large amount of Western equipment was used. He said that Ukrainian forces were assembled in secret. This, I don't believe, is true. I remember listening to the Duran every week talking about a buildup of Ukrainian forces in Charkiv alongside the buildup outside of Cherson for an offensive. And if Brian in Bangkok knew about this, surely the Kremlin knew about this. It wasn't that it was a surprise or it was done in secret. It was just something Russia was not prepared to stop. I think that is the point, the takeaway here. I don't think that it was a secret and it was a surprise to Russian forces. Now, he admits that the offensive ran its course. It stopped at Kupiansk and along the Oskol River. And he also pointed out that Russian forces almost immediately, what they began doing was withdrawing to the east bank of the Oskol River. They created a new defensive line. They moved all of their troops behind it. And that's where they decided to stand and fight and stop the Ukrainian offensive. And I agree with that. That is obviously what happened. Colonel Reisner's presentation, if you watch the whole thing, you'll notice that on the screen, he lists at least 4 brigades participating in this offensive. And then there were, I think, elements from 2 more brigades. And Ukrainian brigade at full strength is about 4,000 troops, but I don't think that any of Ukraine's brigades are at full strength. But the number would be around 15 or 16,000, maybe less, maybe 14,000. This is a number that I've heard many others cite, that it was somewhere between maybe 10 to 15,000 Ukrainian troops and foreign volunteers and mercenaries. Now, the presentation concludes by noting that everything depends on Ukraine's ability to exploit their success around Kharkov. They're not exploiting any success around Cherson because they've not been successful there. And I agree with that. This is why I'm talking about this presentation, what another source from the West is saying about these 2 offensives, what Ukraine does next, what it can and what it cannot do next, and what Russia can and cannot do next is going to tell us everything about how this is going to unfold. If this was a last-ditch gamble by Ukraine, throwing all of their reserves in and losing a lot of them, and then leaving themselves vulnerable to something that Russia can now do. It's their move. Let's see what they do. It's going to determine the course of this conflict. So between the Pentagon briefing, Colonel Reisner's presentation, the fact that we're starting to hear talk about immediate referendums from Cherson all the way to the Donbas region, this is a critical juncture for this conflict. Ukraine executed these offensives. They spent a huge amount of their reserves. It's a matter of how much they've got left now. Did they, like the Germans during the Ardennes offensive, gamble it all and lose? Or do they have enough where they can put together defenses to confound any sort of Russian advance in the aftermath? Will Russia escalate? We already see them escalating in many ways. With these referendums and the possibility of these regions being incorporated officially within the Russian Federation, Russia can escalate this significantly. We have to be on the lookout for all of these developments. You know about them now, so you can keep an eye out for them. If you thought this was interesting or useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to my channel. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. If you're watching this on YouTube, please check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. You can find my work on Telegram. I update that several times a day. It is an alternative for Twitter and Facebook. All of my YouTube videos are automatically uploaded on Odyssey and Rumble, and that could take a day or two for them to show up. Also, it could take a day or two or longer for closed captions to show up on YouTube videos, so please be patient. That is completely beyond my control. I have no control over that. In the video description below, I've listed all of the links that I referenced in this video. There's also ways there that you can help support my work. You could do that through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and also PayPal. To everyone who has been helping out, whether you're contributing month to month, through one-time donations, or even if you're just helping share my work with others, I appreciate all of that. That all helps greatly. I could not do this without that support. Thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.